Good morning, ladies, and welcome to the first installment of the Hagada Shel Pesach, the Heilig Hagada. I have had the merit. I usually the groups of people get smaller when I teach Haggadah because women are busy making Pesach. But I got so much out of it that when I come to a Seder, even if I'm totally wiped and exhausted, I feel very inspired. So you're doing me a favor by allowing me to give these shiurim, because at least I'll be inspired by them. But I hope I can share my enthusiasm and inspiration with you, because again, these are not my words. These are words of great sources and Talmidei Chachamim that I hope to bring down to share with you. The Haggadah was written by someone during the time of the Mishnah, probably one of the Tanoim, who insisted on being anonymous. And there are this was like 20 years ago when I heard this from Rav Shimon Schwab Zatzal. He said there are over 1,000 perushim on the Haggadah in Hebrew. We're not even talking about all the English. That's how deep the Haggadah is. And it's meant to be learned like any other piece of Torah that has very deep, profound meanings on it with it. Now, Rav Shimon Schwab Zatzal tells us that the whole Haggadah is faithfully basing itself on a pasuk in Chumash. That pasuk is in the book of Exodus, Shmos Yud Gimel, pasuk Ches. It says, "V'higada telabincha," and you should tell your son, "Bayom hahu lemor," on that day, saying, "Bavur zeh," because of this, Asa Hashem did to me, but say Simim Mitzrayim, when I came out of Egypt. So there's a biblical commandment that on the night of Pesach, we are obligated to tell your children. If one does not have their children at the Seder, they have to tell themselves. That's how important it is. And we're going to get into many interpretations, explanations, and inspirations. But listen to this, the whole Haggadah, we'll just take it by the order of the Haggadah. If you flip through, starting from, we'll skip halachma right now for this moment, but we will get back to it. If you get into the Magid, right where they start the Magid. So we have the Manish Tana questions, and then we get into, it says, V'higadata. What do you have to tell them? You have to tell them we were once slaved in Egypt. Avadim hayinu. Lebincha. Okay, now wait a minute. After it says they got to tell it, we tell it to whom? We tell the story of that we were slaves. Then it says how important it is to tell this story, that even the greatest sages, the next paragraph, that the greatest sages in Bnei Brak spoke about it all night on the night of Pesach. And then a whole argument I'm just giving you an intro. We're going to go into all these in detail. Then we finally find an argument, whether you have to say it at night, whether you have to say it in the times of Mashiach, the whole idea of Pesach. Okay, that's V'higadata. Then we get Lebincha, to your sons. They give 4 illustrations of types of sons. That we will take up next week. It's a whole class just about the 4 sons. It'll blow your mind. Hopefully we'll tune in next week for that. But so we then have the 4 types of sons and instructions about sons. Okay, Bayom Hahu, that day. So the question in the Haggadah is Yachol me Rosh Chodesh. You'd think it should be on Rosh Chodesh. But then it says that day. We'll get into that. So it's following that pasuk in Chumash. Those verses in Chumash, this whole Haggadah is basing itself on that. Then it says Lamor, saying, that's the Magid. And we're talking about then how we were, the whole story of how we began as idol worshipers, etc. And then Bavur Zeh, because of this, God took me out of Egypt. What are the things that took me out of Egypt? So at the very end of the Magid, we're told Rabban Gamliel says there's 3 things that you have to say, because the purpose of Pesach is Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. That's Bavur Zeh. Asa Hashem li, God did for me. It says every generation, B'chol Dor Vador. If you're in the Art Scroll, one of these kind of Haggadahs, this would be on page 44. Asa Hashem li, every generation, a person has to view himself as he left Egypt. But say Simim Mitzrayim is the Hallel, but say Sisrael Mitzrayim. So it really fits the whole idea. The Hallel goes faithfully, the Haggadah goes faithfully according to those verses, that verse in Chumash, to fulfill the promise that we're supposed to do on the Pesach night. We're supposed to speak about these things. Now, let's start from the beginning, and we'll try to get as far as we can. So really make you feel like you have something to say. Now, really, Rav Shimon Schwab says a lot of people say all kinds of little vertlach, and the kids have to say something, but the main purpose is to bring for few is if this is a night of education for ourselves and for others of the main principles, precepts of Judaism. And that's what we're supposed to push from generation to generation. And it's also that we can get really fundamental principles into our innards, really to intensify our belief in Hashem and basic principles in Judaism. But let's start off with the very beginning of the Haggadah, which I always found fascinating. It's called Halach Ma'anya or Kihalach Ma'anya, depending on the nusach of your Haggadah. This is the, when you're supposed to hold up a piece of broken matzah. This is the bread of affliction we ate in Mitzrayim. Whoever is hungry, let him come and eat. Whoever is needy, let him come and celebrate Pesach. Now we're here. Next year, we're going to be land of Israel. Now we're slaves. Next year, we're free men. Now, there's two interesting things about this. This is the only part of the entire Haggadah that's written in Aramaic. And the Lutzker Rav, Rav Zalman Sorotzkin Zatzal, tells us it's not for naught that this is the only part written in Aramaic. This was added to the Haggadah in later times during the Second Temple period by Sheni. This is when the Jews began their transition to exile. And it's in Aramaic to be spoken to the multitudes of people. They should understand something. Now, a lot of people think, this is like a general introduction. Come and eat with us. There is a mitzvah. V'samachtu l'fnei Hashem Elokecha ata v'ger. It says in Devarim Tes Zayin, you are supposed to invite less fortunate people to your Pesach Seder. That's the mitzvah. People that are strangers, people that are gerim, people that are, that needy. That's who's supposed to come to your Seder. But it's a very awkward time to have this portion in the Haggadah because we've just said Kiddush. If you're what kind of hypocrite are you? You're inviting people after you've made Kiddush, like if either they said in the olden days, if people wanted to have a guest, they would put some kind of flag hanging outside their door to attract guests in ancient times in the Jewish world. Any case, that's one question. So we're saying Halach Ma'anya, when the doors are closed, it's after Kiddush. And we have other questions on this paragraph. It says, Kol Dichvin, whoever is needy, let him eat. Whoever is needy, let him keep Pesach. Like, why do we repeating these repetitions? Now we're here, next year in Israel. Now we're slaves. Next year we'll be free. What are the meaning? There is a deeper meaning to all this. I'll show you how gorgeous everything in the Haggadah is. First of all, there are three main symbols at the Seder night. The first one is Pesach. If you have any comments or questions, please, put them out and we'll answer you. But any case, the three symbols on this night that are very important. One is the Pesach. The Pesach is the Paschal Lamb. But we don't have that today. So instead we point to the shank bone or whatever it is. Some people don't point to it because there really isn't the korban anymore. This symbolizes freedom. The deity of the Egyptians was the lamb. Just like the Hindus have a cow running in the street, the Egyptians had their lambs running in the street. The lamb was the sacred animal that nobody would dare toy with. And the Jews, having been enslaved for 210 years, were commanded to take that very deity and slaughter it, put the blood on their doorposts, and sit in their homes and eat it. If there's no bigger sign of freedom than that, in so many ways. The maror, the bitter herbs, which we'll talk about later, but you fulfill them. There's two kinds of bitter herbs. One is like a vegetable and one is like the horseradish. By the way, Rabbi Aaron Kotler Zatzal said the best thing to do with maror should be chasa, it should be lettuce. A lot of people use romaine lettuce or something like that for maror. You don't have to blow your mind out in order to fulfill the mitzvah of maror on Pesach. That's not what Hashem wants. But in any case, maror symbolizes enslavement, because there's a dichotomy the whole night between freedom and slavery. The whole night, we're supposed to with those are two major themes, but there's going to be many others as well. Now, matzah is very interesting because matzah has the qualities of both. On one hand, matzah symbolizes slavery. Like this is halach ma'anya. That's what we're going to be talking about here, is that this first interpretation, that matzah is defined, defines slavery. Why? I once went years ago. It was so beautiful when they had money in Canada in the olden days. They had this place in Kingston, Ontario called Fort Henry. It was fantastic. My children loved it. They had a fantabulous museum. You could see how people lived in a fort in the 1800s with British soldiers. And there was even a park there, by the way. I'm really digressing, but okay, give you a little bit of interest. You had a park there where there were, I forgot how many Nazis were locked into Fort Henry during World War II. And they actually escaped through the pipes. They escaped into the St. Lawrence. They were caught, but that's where they were holding prisoners. And then they took that out of the museum they had there. They didn't have any mentions of Nazis recently. I wonder why. But in any case, anyways, and they had other fantastic things in the olden days in Fort Henry. They used to have the the American Marines would come. They'd have a whole procession. It was really majestic, phenomenal. Anyways, they were talking there about, they had two types of bread being served for breakfast to the common man, the workers there, the lower on the echelon of the ladder. They would just throw a dough into the oven and just take it out. They would let it rise more, put extra yeast and let it rise more for the captains and lieutenants and all the Reicha Menschen. They would get the higher degree of bread. So on one hand, the bread of Pesach symbolizes the servitude, the fact that we had this bread of affliction. They didn't care about feeding us properly. We didn't really have luxurious foods. And on the other hand, there is another meaning to matzah, and that's why matzah is the main thing for Pesach. Matzah also is the bread of freedom, that we had to put a dough on our backs, and we had no time to let it rise because Hashem took us out without even us knowing the exact moment. Here he was. We couldn't prepare properly. We just had to grab it and run. So matzah really has dual elements for both meanings. Anyway, so this is lachma anya. This is the meaning of lechem oni, the meaning of bread that describes affliction. And we're talking to the Jew in exile. That's who we're talking to. You now are sitting in an exile situation. Now, how can we understand exile? There's some exiles, we're more fortunate in this exile than we were in many other exiles. We're not, God forbid, in concentration camps, and we're not, living a very harsh life. So what does it mean that, how can what are the messages for us in Gullus that we get from the Halach Ma'anya? So says the Lutzker Rav that Yirmiyahu Navi tells us that there are two basic challenges. Just going to get this microphone back on. There's two basic, I just took it off. There's two basic challenges in Gullus. One challenge is called the Shod, Hashod v'Hashever. These are the two adjectives that Yirmiyahu uses to describe Gullus. Shod means like shodadim. Shodadim means like thieves, robbers, that steal from you. One problem that Jews always have in Gullus, and even in today's world, and even in Toronto, is financial. Jews often, in the olden days, had to pay higher taxes than other folk. Today, we have to pay for a lulav and an esrog and Pesach. They say it's Pesach. You're paying a lot to make Pesach, right? It's not like, we have, and in most places, most cities in the world, you have to pay tuition. You don't get off of it. If you're Canadian and you're Catholic, you get free tuition. If you are Jewish, well, the buck stops here. And then we have other things, all holidays is a whole big, we have to, and then there's this more work. There's building a sukkah and the schach and the thing and the this and the that and the taking off Shabbos. And there's a lot of things that we have to deal with because we're in Gullus. And even in Eretz Yisrael, there's not so much favoritism shown to the Haredim necessarily, that they still have to go out on a limb more than the rest of the common man. The country's not made necessarily for Haredim. So they have to do things that other people don't have to do in order to maintain their Judaism. So that's one challenge of Gullus. Shetels, I forgot that. If you want to go into real, get a second mortgage to buy yourself a few new shetels. There's a lot. And then the number of children, there's plenty of things we have to deal with that the normal human being doesn't have to deal with. It's not for naught that there's some offices in Bnei Brak and in Lakewood where the entire office is staffed by frum women who are supporting their husbands in Kollel. Why? What woman could think, let's say, of making Purim? You give that here in countries like North America, they're agonizing over Xmas from October. One day Purim is far harder than Xmas. We have to hear 2 Megillah readings. We have to make a Suda, and we have to give Shalach Manas to a lot of people. That's like a heroic act, or a lady has to make Pesach with a huge family and all the ins and outs of where are we going to eat here and there and everywhere. And the amounts of food she has to cook, and the amounts of the chametz and the whole. It's like heroic. By the way, the Belzer Rebbetzin used to say that every drop of sweat for Pesach is like tears on Yom Kippur, is equal to the tears we shed on Yom Kippur. So every effort we make for Pesach is a huge, huge thing in heaven, because what Hashem values is effort. He doesn't value final things that occur. Hashem wants our effort. That's what he's looking for. Now, the second thing that Yirmiyahu laments that will happen in Gullus, besides Shod, is something called Shever. Shever means to be broken, to be despondent. How are we despondent? Usually it's the spirit that's despondent. One thing that's very negative about Gullus is that we are further from the real source of purity. We don't have a real Beis Hamikdash. We have a semblance of the Shekhinah at the Kosel, but amongst it, you hear the chiming of the bells of the other religions and the calling out to prayer. And you see like how many Jews are estranged from Yiddishkeit. And this a lot to do with Gullus. We tend to be like the people around us. But, at the same time, this Gullus is supposed to help us. There is something to be said about Gullus. The Bali Tosfos was written in the hardest part of the Crusades, when people were being tortured. The Brisker Ravs itself from the Chaim Brisker. No, was it Rav Chaim Brisker? No, Rav Velvel, the son of the Brisker Rav. Rav Velvel said that his biggest Torah was written in the heart of the concentration camps, or wherever he was. He was displaced. I don't think it was a concentration camp, but just going from place to place, that really made him, laser focus on what was real in life. And that's why we're in Gullus. It's supposed to remind us that look how meaningless Gullus is. Look how we have gained nothing from the nations of the world, and the best thing we have to hang on to is our Torah. So anyways, in this portion of Halach Ma'anya, we're told when we hold up this bread of affliction, we're saying we are still in Gullus. Who knows? We may not have to say this paragraph once Mashiach comes, by the way. So you have to know it anyways, but for now, just in case, but hopefully we won't have to say it this year. Anyways, it says, Kol dichven yeseh v'yechol. Anyone that is bent over, literally, should come and eat. Now, what does that mean? That means that's referring to physicality. Whoever wants to feel like, Gullus has deprived him of his finances. Now I'm giving it modern terms, but let's go back. There's people but persecuted by non-Jews for thousands of years, and they were really starving, be it in concentration camps, being tortured or being whatever it was. And they were starving, literally starving. My great-grandparents starved in Poland from my mother's side. My mother's grandparents literally starved between the 2 world wars in Poland. And he was a Melamed and she was his wife, and they mamish died of starvation. Anyways, but Kol dichvin yeseh v'yechol, let him come eat Pesach with us. What does that mean? Not that we're going to feed, all those past injuries. It means learn the lesson of Pesach. Who could have starved more than the slaves in Egypt? And yet Pesach, suddenly, everything's good. Everything was solved. All our problems were solved. That is the message of Pesach, to teach us this is your physical solution. Hashem can save you physically. Don't despair. And then it says, Kol ditzrich yeseh v'yifsach. Whoever's needy, that means in a spiritual sense, let them again learn the lesson from Pesach. You know, many people Pesach night used to take out their concentration camp uniforms and show it to their family. And look at me now, I'm not in concentration camp anymore. Same thing with Pesach. They were enslaved. They were spiritually despondent, the 49th level of impurity. And in moments, they were transported in God's hands. They saw the hand of Hashem in the 10 plagues. And then they were this Kriyas Yamsuf. They were like Nevi'im. And all those things they saw from the lessons of Pesach. So it says, it goes back to the physical and spiritual again. And it says, Hasha Tahacha, now we're here. That's talking about now we're here. It says next year we're going to be in Israel. What does that mean? In a physical sense, like now we have gullahs, but just like the Jews were stuck in Mitzrayim, they got out of it. Hashata Avde Lashana Haba B'nei Harim. I can't talk now. I'm sorry. I can't. I says next year we're slaves. That means what's that? That's a spiritual sense. Next year we're slaves. That means we're slaves to the Yetzer Hara. It says Ein lecha ben chorin elamisha osek b'Torah. We are constantly enslaved to not being objective. Now, people that follow their hearts are not always doing right. We are not objective with ourselves. We are not objective in who we are. And we need sometimes objectivity. And now, especially in Gullus, we're enslaved to our desires. But Pesach, we saw that a person can come to very high levels. We need our leaders. We need good friends that'll tell us when we do something wrong. People often have teenage children. They do the same job, but they're not always right. But they will also tell us off when we're doing something wrong. And spouses also tend to fulfill that function. They say that's the basic reason for a woman being there with her husband. The helpmate, Ezer Kenegdo, is that she helps him when he does something wrong. The woman notices it. It says, V'harishaim kayam nigrash. Wicked people are like the waves of the ocean. They're pushed and pulled. 1 minute it's taiva, then it's gaiva, then it's this, then it's that. We have to hold ourselves, not to go astray. We have to, get a hold of ourselves and fight our Yetzer Hara. And it'll be much easier than times of Mashiach, which is parallel to the idea of the Midbar and all that, is that we will have our Yetzer Hara lessened. But of course, you get much more reward right now if we decide to do the right thing, even when times are very dark. Okay, so that sums the halach ma'anya, which is very important to know, because these are the two challenges that we have, the physical and the spiritual challenges, just like we had the physical and spiritual enslavement in Egypt. And that we have to take that lesson out with us, just like we were saved when things were very low, we can also be saved again. Okay, now we come to the Manish Tana. And the Manish Tana has 4 questions. 2 of them are biblical. The first 2 about, the matzah and the maror are a question about why do we eat matzah and not chametz, and why do we only eat maror. Those are based on biblical commandments. And the 2 questions about dipping and reclining are rabbinic. There was a 5th one. The Rambam said there was a 5th question of why do we bring the Korban Pesach during the time of the temple. Some people dispute that. Some people say it was replaced by reclining, which was more common in later days. Any case, but now okay, so the question is, why is there a question? Why do we say Manish Tana? In Mishnah, very often they start off with a question and then they give answers. But why do we use the form of questioning? And there's a deep, profound reason for that. When a person asks a question, he gets invested in the answer. So it's good to think, oh, yes, why is that? That's why it's very important in schools. When there's teachers that don't take any questions, I think that's horrible for Jewish education. Kids should not be spoon-fed dogma. That's not our religion. Our religion is to invest yourself, ask any question, feel comfortable to ask any question. And then it says, lo abaishan lo made, like a person cannot learn if he's too embarrassed to ask a question. We need to ask questions, because then we get invested in the answer, and then we'll satisfy our intellectual curiosity. Now, when you get invested in something, now we learn something very important. The answer really is the same given to the wise son. Avadim hayinu lefaro b'Mitzrayim. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. That's the answer to the Manishtana. But the interesting thing at this Seder night, when we ask the questions, why do we eat this and why do we eat that and why do we do this and why do we do that? The idea of getting it gets us pumped. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz Zatzal mentions that there were 4 different gates to get to the Beis Hamikdash, and a person was not allowed to go out the same gate he came in. To get him, everything should seem new. When you ask a question, like, it makes the thing new again, even if you've done it for 50 years, it's new, and the way we're being answered is very, very tersely. That's the way the Mishnah talks in any case, but we're being answered tersely throughout the whole Haggadah. There's a Chazal, our sages in the Talmud tell us, Dai Hakima Biramiza. If you want to become wise, if you want to make somebody else wise, the best way is to do it with hinting. That's why we get questions. So the person listening is going to be invested, and the less talking you do, the better. That's really the ultimate teacher, is to get the student invested and the student learning it with you not saying too much. Like Yosef said, there's 3 words to his brothers and they were devastated. He said 5 words, Ani Yosef ha'od avi chai. I am Yosef, is my father still alive? His brothers were blown away. Now he could have given them a whole speech, boy, 22 years, look what you did to me. Instead, few words, and look what he did. It says that, I remember Phyllis Weinberg, Aleh Shalom, her children were talking about her and praising her. She's a famous lady here in Toronto. For those of you who don't know who she was a pioneer in trying to get Shmir Salushin and Midos into Toronto. In any case, her kids said that whenever they did something wrong, she never chastised them. She just said, did you do that? Or why did you do that? Like, she never really directly confronted them. And look how they turned out. She has tremendous children, amazing kids, and they followed her every move and every footstep because she didn't give it to them. A lot of us as parents think like the best way to give a message is let's say your kid at 4 takes something from the candy store. This is going to be your moment to give this big speech about how stealing is so terrible. And all it does is, first of all, the kid feels, you're screaming at me? It's all about you. If you're so upset, it's nothing to do with me. It has to do with you. And if it has to do with you, I'm not interested. Like Rav Elchanan Wasserman, like Simcha Wasserman Zatzal once said, if you get angry, maybe you'll get your child to control himself for a few minutes, but it's not a teaching moment. A teaching moment is when the kid comes to the realization, I goofed. But when they feel they're being opposed, they're being screamed at, they just back away, and they all of a sudden, they're not listening wholeheartedly. The message does not get imparted. Rav Meir Chadash, the famous mashgiach of Hebron, he had a way about himself, but when somebody did something wrong, he basically tried to ignore it. Sometimes he'd mention things in his speeches, but he would not confront a student. He said, if you confront somebody too much in our generation, they feel so threatened that they feel like their defenses go up. And he said, and they will feel so despondent, they won't even feel like trying. So he basically did not rebuke people for too many things, too often. Now, they say this in a marriage, don't sweat the small stuff. That people listen to you more, the less you say. They say the ideal mother-in-law is a shviger. A shviger means to schweigen, to be quiet in Yiddish. But they say the only thing you're supposed to do is open your wallet and close your mouth, and then you're the ideal mother-in-law. I think it applies to father-in-law too, but he's schwer anyways. But it just at some point we just have, the less said, the more we teach. Dai Hakima Bermiza. And Slobodka, they even just said die, and you're already supposed to know what that means. The less said, the better. That's a big lesson from the Haggadah. And like, for example, let's give the examples of the night. Like, we're asking questions and we're saying things very tersely. Okay. Mrs. Arbach just said something beautiful. She just, Hannah Devor Arbach just, did you see that comment? She just said, if your wallet is empty, close your mouth even more. Very cute. Anyways, so we say that, it says, Ma nishtana halayla zeh, how, Shem Schwab says, Ma means lama. How much, how so is this night different from all other nights? We're not asking like a total question. We're making an exclamation. This night is different. We have all these symbols. And why do we have symbols? We put on the table, if you want to be really, to get the feeling of servitude, why aren't we just beating each other up at the table, carrying rocks? Instead, like for mortar, we have charoses. I think that's a pretty good deal for mortar, if you ask me. Okay, if you have, and if we have like, if we're talking about, it's not maror, rather, maror is lettuce. Like you'd think you should burn your mouth out with something and then you'll feel the bitterness of Egypt. A little bit of salt water you dip something into, that's the tears. Like, come on, it's so ridiculous, so trivial. Why are these the time to allude to us the whole night of Pesach, the 210 years of servitude? How are we supposed to get that message from those trivial things on our Seder table? And the answer is, Rav Yosef Leib Bloch, Zechrona Livracha, once said that if somebody gives a message too strong, people's defense mechanisms go up and they won't impart the message properly and they won't absorb the message, the takers. He said though, but if there's a little illusion, then you get it. So that's why it's just symbolism on the table, and that is sufficient. You don't need a whole, harsh type of behavior to get people thinking about the Pesach night. Another example I can think of from Chumash that really applies is the story of the Sota. The Sota is this woman that was unfaithful to her husband. She was warned many times, at least 3 occasions. She was warned not to hang out with Charlie because she's been seen with Charlie an awful lot of times, and she's a married woman. And lo and behold, she and Charlie are alone in a room, a locked room together for 18 minutes or more. That's pretty bad. So her husband's allowed to suspect her. What sacrifice does the Sota have to bring? She has to bring a sacrifice of barley. Now, I would think, some of the Kohen should give her a whole speech. It's not modest for a woman to be a married woman to be with this guy so many times. They've been warning you against Charlie, and you're sitting alone with him 15 to 18 minutes alone. What is this? Like, this is impropriety plus. But we find that barley is a kind of a mild message. What does barley represent? Barley represents that it's an animal food. You never find barley in high cuisine. You don't find barley, great barley bread and barley au jus, whatever. You don't find holy barley. Basically, is the most basic of all the grains that you can't really dress up too much. It has this place at the cholent and a few soups, and that's about it. So we're kind of hinting to this woman, you did an animalistic act by letting yourself loose and going against what's proper by being alone with this guy for 18 minutes. It was improper of you to do such a thing. But we don't scream and yell at her. Now, if she's guilty, it says like her stomach bursts. And by the way, her guy that she hung out with, he's also going to die simultaneously at the same moment. But if she's innocent, the Kohen Gadol gives her a bracha for tzaddikim as children because she was suspected wrong. Now, this is a woman who's done something wrong. She broke the laws of Yichud. She was alone with a guy, but she didn't do anything really horrible with him. So for this reason, she does get a blessing. God doesn't take away reward for any one of his creations. So that's the idea here of asking questions to get ourselves invested in the things on the table, just in a hint. And the best teaching is often just soft spoken, few words here. We don't have to batter down the person hears the message 50 times, to make sure they heard the message. They hear it once. That is the best way to impart a message. Okay, now okay. Now we're going to talk about we're going to give the answer to the 4 questions. And basically, again, this is just to get interest. You're supposed to get your kids interested throughout the Seder, get them special, things to eat. Like in our house, I get them the chocolate mousse chocolates. And that's sold here in Toronto of the Makos. And they are amazing. The kids if they say something good or if they ask a good question, then they get chocolates during the Seder. And that's that's a special night to look forward to, that they start thinking and they see there's answers for everything in our Torah. And they see that that's how you get them all interested in the right things. Now, when we get to the answers, we first go to Avadim Hayinu. We were slaves in Egypt. There is a klal. Chazal tell us the way you're supposed to talk on the night of Pesach is the way the Hagada does it. It says, Maschil begnus u'mesayim b'shvach. You're supposed to start off with the negative and conclude with the positive. That's the dictum that we're supposed to follow. Now, there's an argument between 2 great Tanaim, Rav and Shmuel. Shmuel says you start with Avadim Hayinu, that we were slaves in Egypt. That's the lowest part, and then we're freed. Whereas Rav says we start from a little bit later in the Haggadah, when it says in the beginning, our ancestors were idolaters. Now, why? Both of them are actually right. They're just 2 sides of the coin, which is like every argument in the Gemara or it's just teaching us 2 sides of the coin to appreciate. So when you talk about it's because the end of the Haggadah, according to Rav, it says when you take out this nation from Egypt, Tavdunas Elokim Bahar Hazeh, you will serve Hashem on the mountain of Sinai. So the purpose of Pesach is in order to get the Torah, according to Rav, the spiritual deprivation, and now the spiritual prize. And then we've got Shmuel, who's saying it was the physical deprivation and the physical prize. Now, why do we do it this way? How is this? Why do we have to start with the negative and conclude with the positive? The reason says, this Rav Zalman Sorotzkin, you're going to hear me quote him a lot. I love his Haggadah. It was very hard to get it. I don't even know if it's in print. It's called Hashir v'Hashevach. I just, over the years, used this in a lot of I just think he also wrote the Znaim LaTorah, if any of you ever heard that, on Chumash. I just love his Parish. I'm bringing some other things too, but he says like this. He says, when you go down to the depths, you appreciate more. The more, that's why we say brachas, by the way. People say, why don't you just have a general bracha, unspecific bracha for everything? Why do you have to say, I'll have to figure out, like, for example, there's this candy in Israel and ice cream. It's called psaksman. I know the question was brought to Rav Yashuv, and I don't remember the answer. I almost had an opportunity to eat a psaksman, but what happened was it didn't say the bracha on the label. And in Israel, everything has brachas on the label that shows everyone agrees with the halacha of what the bracha is. When there's no specified bracha, that means it's a machlokas, because it's like a wafer, it's crunch, and it is, they didn't know what it was, so I didn't eat it because I didn't know what bracha to make on it. But in any case, why is it that we're so specific? You have to know, like, okay, is this mostly Adama? When you're eating a fruit salad, for example, little pieces, a lot of people say it's the majority of what you take on your spoon is what you make the bracha on, majority in the fruit salad. Some people say there's all kinds of different complications. Why do we have to be so specific? The answer is, when you specify more, you are really appreciating more. You're saying he brought bread from the earth. You're saying it's this from a tree. It's more specific than just say thanks, just thanks. It's the idea, like if somebody has a wedding and you give a gift and you put a lot of thought into it, you get them a vacuum cleaner, for example, and all they say is thanks for your gift, you'd be pretty insulted, because they're not, you went through trouble, you thought about it, you made efforts, and all you get is a general thank you. So the same thing, you look at from a tree, you brought me this fruit. It's unbelievable, from a tree or from the ground. You brought me my bread with all the 11 steps to making bread. That shows more appreciation. And how much more so when you say we were slaves, to first say, like, let's say kids of today, they really need to hear this. They're further from the Holocaust. It's an unbelievable miracle that we're all existing today and talking in a normal way to each other when our ancestors went through such horrific suffering, and they thought there was never going to be a Jewish person after that. There was a famous story of Rav Elimer Bloch when he started Tells in Cleveland. He walks into some Jewish bookstore on the east side of New York, and he was looking for a Ketzos Choshen, which is very commonly studied in Tells. And the bookstore owner says, wait a minute. He went up, he found something, it was totally dusty, brushed it off. He says, enjoy this. It's the last Ketzos you'll probably ever see in America. This was prior to World War II. And now there's plenty of everything you can get in America in the Torah world. So, these people thought they were goners. They thought they had nothing to, that was it. And yet this is Pesach revival that we're trying to get into detail. The more detail we say, the more we appreciate what we have. The be more, this is, I'll tell you, I'll throw in a psychological thing too. This is really important. I don't know if all of you are really well versed in human relations, but one big thing to do when you're with somebody, I don't know if I read this or I just kind of knew it, and then I found it was in a book somewhere, or some Miriam Adan somewhere, who knows? But there's some idea, like when you're with somebody, at the very end of your visit, you should say something like, it was so nice you came over. I really got a lot. You sum up what you got from your meeting with this person, or thank you. It was so kind of you what you did for me today. Like this way you specify that person feels appreciated. You really feel appreciated and respected when you could summarize that you did get something out of your conversation, even on a phone. Thanks. I really learned a lot from what you just told me, or something like that at the end to sum up. It's always a very good idea. But in any case, we were avadim with Paro b'Mitzrayim. Paro was, he owned the whole world. He was the head of all Egypt in the time of Yosef. And not only that, everybody became slaves to him, because he owned all their property. They all had to buy during the time of famine, and all of Egypt became subservient to Paro. And he was a very difficult king, like maybe, I don't want to say any names of world leaders today, but there are many of them that could be under his list. we were subservient to him in Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim, they were slaves and we were slaves to slaves, And Mitzrayim is interesting. Mitzrayim epitomizes lack of appreciation. 1 century before, Yosef made their civilization flourish. He fed the whole Egypt. He sustained them. He had this master plan that everybody in Egypt should be indebted to him. He should be on every coin. He should be, a memorial in his memory. Instead, his family, his relatives, his flesh were all afflicted just like less than a century later. It's amazing, a lack of appreciation. We have to go on the Pesach night and be the opposite and really deeply appreciate everything that we have, that we own today. And Hashem took us out from there. Biyad chazakah, strong hand. Hands have 10 fingers. There's the 10 plagues. Zro and Atuya means an outstretched arm. That was the Makas Bechoros. The final plague was a real punch. It destroyed the whole, it was like the final thing to destroy everything. And everybody was afraid of what was going to be. But if Hashem would not have taken our forefathers out of Egypt, we, our sons and grandchildren, would all be enslaved to Paro in Mitzrayim. Now, when we talk about this, it means, this little phrase means, if God would not have taken us out in a miraculous way, let's say we would have won a revolt, or he would have just let us go, we would have been indebted spiritually to them forever. Because once you're slave mentality and they're the ruling class, that becomes your thing you want to look up to for the rest of your life. That's your epitome, to be Egyptian. There's so many cultures like that. I'm not going to go into the parallels in our culture today, how the ideal is to be a certain way, and we tend to mimic it. I had the great fortune of going to Breuer's Seminary when I went to seminary, and it was in Manhattan and Washington Heights, New York, which was very German Jewish, Yekes. But it was a Litvische Musser seminary, really, because Rabbi Elias, Colonel Bracha, made it that way. But when you'd go to a class on Shabbos in shul in Washington Heights, they started on the 2nd. They, they had that German influence. German Jews have the influence of Germany. Now, there's very great things to say about German Jews. I also thought they were very hardworking people, very honest. And also, you never knew in shul who was wealthy and who was not. You could not tell from the way they lived or anything. They were just not into that. They were not into displays. And Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said, Bruchim Hashkenazim, because of their Seder. He complimented the German Jews for being so organized. Organization is good and being on time. God's on time when he makes the sun rise and fall. I mean, we women are exempt from time-bound commandments, but we're not exempt from lighting candles on time. Or Rebbetzin Kolodetsky, Shishbi tells us, Rav Chaim Zatzal said, like one of the things we should do to memorize her father is to light candles 10 minutes early. Now people say time, but look, God, we were emulating Hashem. God makes the clockwork, the sunrise and the sunset. We're not God, that's for sure. We've got, especially women, we've got all kinds of other things going on, but we can emulate, timeliness. But that's beside the point. The main thing I'm trying to say is Jews are often enslaved to their cultures. Hungarian Jews tend to decorate their homes the way Hungarian people did. We tend to eat foods of our nationality. I definitely think Jews from different parts of the world definitely pick up from the other people in our habitat, like we do. And that's one of the negatives of Gullus. There's some good things about other people we live with, and there's a lot of bad usually that we also shouldn't pick up at. So if we would have come out of Mitzrayim another way, we would forever be submissive to the Egyptians. And even if we'd all be wise men. Now, if we're going to be talking all night about the Yetzias Mitzrayim, leaving Egypt, why does this even for all wise men? Because wise men, you'd think they know it all already. What's there to say anymore? They know it all. Even if we're wise, maybe it's a tough question. And maybe you think that's why we're staying up all night, because there's such tough questions. Nope, even a wise man has to stay up all night talking about Mitzrayim. Kulanu nevonim. Even if we have bina, which means you can infer something from something else. Kulanu zakanim, where even people that have acquired everything. They're all they're the elders of the community. They're the wise, the rabbanim of the community. Even if we know the whole Torah, we have a mitzvah l'saper b'yetzias Mitzrayim. We have a mitzvah to talk. Now it says in, the correct grammar here is talk in Mitzrayim. Why are we talking in Yetzias Mitzrayim? Because we're not supposed to remember but we're supposed to get into all the details. More details, the better, because that makes you more appreciative and more, it'll get absorbed in yourself, and you'll and whoever speaks more about the Exodus of Egypt, he is praiseworthy. Meshubach, according to Malbim, means improved. The more you praise, the more you yourself become improved. You notice people that are usually the most complimentary are the people that are most, they themselves are happy, usually happier. People are bitter because of their bitter situations that they're in, but a person can make themselves be appreciative. And the more they become appreciative by always talking positively, by always talking like that, that makes you more appreciative and really seeing the truth in life, which really it has a lot of positives for our benefit. Now, usually you're not supposed to go to great lengths to praise Hashem. You're not supposed to say long things. I heard once from Rav Shlomo Miller's Shlita, sorry, just quoting so many people here, Shbika Bench, Besidra, and Sponsik, and more. Rav Shlomo Miller once spoke to a bunch of women years ago, and he said, women shouldn't be davening hours and hours and hours unless she's elderly and there's not much else for her to do, because it's not a woman's job. Women should be getting things ready for their husbands and helping other people. And in fact, it's a big merit to be like that. They say Rebbetzin Kanievsky, Zechron Levracha, was told by the Stipler that she could give blessings because she engages in helping the poor more than he did. That's what he told her. You have the power of blessing because you're helping elderly women who have nowhere to go, and you're feeding them and taking care of them. And he said, I don't have that. He had plenty of other things, the Stipler, but a woman does have that power of her giving and her, and the mitos and nurturing to other people and enabling other people. And that is what helps her. Now, we're told, my Rebbe Elias Zatzal says that the only exception of praise, person normally can't call Hashem by a million adjectives, because if you do so, it looks like you've exhausted all your praise. The one exception, though, is a person who's experienced a miracle is allowed to keep going. And since we are the descendants of all those who left Egypt, we can keep going in our praise. I'm sorry, he brings from the Sfas Emes. And that's why, by seeing ourselves as our descendants merited this miracle, we too have this opportunity. So to sum up so far, I'm just still going to go for about another 10 minutes. We talk about how we're so impressed by our environment. We can't minimize that. And that's one of the challenges of being in exile, and how, everything God took us out of Egypt, it was all a miracle, and the idea of appreciation. And then if we bring from the Halach Ma'anya, also not to be too hard-handed and to say too much, that's, to say the least is better. And also the Halach Ma'anya is the idea of the double test of Galus, the physical and the spiritual. Now we get into actual people. So this is, we're doing, we've filled the first part of the Hagada with the Higadata. Okay, we're still doing that. So we're talking about what the story is that we have to tell. Then we're saying people that did it, even the greatest rabbis, we're expounding on that. The greatest rabbis, they still were staying up all night. We have Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Tarfon, and Bnei Brak. They're not quite sure if it's the Bnei Brak of today, but in any case, Rabbi Kiva was the Rav of Bnei Brak at the time. Most of Rabbi Kiva came from converts. Some people say he was a descendant of Sisra and Yael, by the way. And the other ones were all Levim and Kohanim who were not enslaved in Egypt. And all these people stayed up all night talking about the Exodus until their students had to. Now the students were with their families. That's why they didn't sit by them. And so maybe we could tell a certain Hasidim, if they want to go to the Rebbe's Tish for Pesach, don't leave your wife. Anyways, but and then they and I don't know if they. Anyways, I don't know if Hasidim will go to the Tish for the Seder. I would doubt it. They go with their wives. Anyways, their students told them it's time for Kriya Shema. They were all night until it was time to say Shema. They were all night expounding on the Haggadah. Now, why were they doing that? Why was the idea there? No, by the way, I said that Levi, the tribe of Levi, was not enslaved in Egypt. Yosef got them like a permit to get out of, out of jail, out of work. So that whole tribe were excused from work the whole time of their duration in Egypt. And what was I going to say here? So the Abarbanel says, the reason we stay up late is because the Jews in Egypt didn't sleep that night. So why should we? They didn't know when they were going to be told to leave. All they knew is that they were up all night with the Korban Pesach and all that. They'd eat there and sit there and wait for God to tell them when they were leaving. It must have been very dramatic. Here you're eating the Egyptian deity and you are just waiting to be taken out of Egypt. Now, why were they up all night? Because they're talking B'Yetzias Mitzrayim. Rav Shimon Schwab tells us on the Seder nights, the Shechina comes to our table. We are a chance to have a really intimate communion with Hashem. The Yom Kippur is a time where each individual can have his spiritual freedom. Pesach, we as a nation became freed, even though we didn't deserve it. We didn't do tshuva or anything. But it's a night when the Shechina is at your table. As we're talking, B'Yetzias Mitzrayim, Lo Al Yedei Malach. We are reenacting the whole Pesach every year when it comes by. Rav Dessler tells us that, he says, a yontif, a holiday, is like sitting on a train. You're going on, a train, and it has certain stops. And maybe it's a different driver and they're different passengers. But whenever it gets to a certain stop, you see the same scenery, you get the same vibes or whatever it is over there. Dessler says too, when we have a holiday, it's not to commemorate Pesach. It's like astrology. We believe in astrology to a certain degree. We have the same opportunity for physical and spiritual redemption at the Seder night. And even the environment around us is screaming it. We have freedom, especially you feel it in Toronto. We are about to be rid of the winter doldrums. You see people all of a sudden are smiling. I remember one year people were talking, it's +3, you know, in Toronto when it got to the plus column. You know, in Israel, there's other, you know, they probably, the weather is starting to improve very much now in Israel as well, but it's, we're still lagging until Pesach. We're going to be, and even on Pesach, sometimes we had a little bit of a storm, a winter something, but it does get better. And we do see that there is a freedom. Like winter, you know, people feel all this white and gray all over the place. And all of a sudden things become, the sky turns blue all of a sudden, and there's green little buds coming. It is a wonderful thing to admire and look at. It gives you such a positive feeling. Now, so that's the idea of they were talking all night. Now, you know, in our Seder, it's interesting. The meal is sandwiched by Hallel. We say the first part of Hallel before the meal and the second part of Hallel after the meal. That means even your meal, the Shlach Kaddish says you should try not to talk unnecessary words at your Seder, like during the meal. Don't get too like, hey, what's going on? You know, this is a serious night. The Shekhinah is at our table, even during the meal, and meal is part of Hallel. So, you know, it's like, this is what we're trying to impart at this night. Okay, I'm just going to leave with one more chunk of the Haggadah. And this is a little bit complicated, but it's like a little, but just to understand what the argument is, because women often didn't. And so I decided to take the plunge and try to figure out what it is saying to us. Rav Elazar ben Azariah was 18 years old when he became the head of the Sanhedrin. Hashem miraculously put gray streaks in his beard so he'd look respectable. But he was the chosen one to be the head of Sanhedrin. He said, I'm like 70 years because of my beard, and I didn't merit in having the Exodus from Egypt mentioned every night until Ben Zoma came along and he said, there's a pasuk in Deuteronomy, Laman tiskor yom tzeischa meretz Mitzrayim kol yemei chayecha. You should remember the days of exiting Egypt, all the days of your lives. What are all the days of your lives? Days of your lives are day. All the days of your lives means even at night. And the sages said that your days are this world. All the days of your life include the world to come. Okay, we have to explain this. It's never been understood. I mean, a lot of ladies don't understand what this is saying, but I delved into this, and this is how one way we can understand it. The Aruch HaShulchan, I heard this from my Rebbe, Rabbi Elias Sitzal, and he said in the name of the Aruch HaShulchan. What is the argument in the sages here? What are they arguing about? Now, first of all, why is this whole paragraph in here? Remember, we're talking about Hagada lebincha. We're still in the word Hagada, the first word of that verse. Now we see that we said it in brief that we were slaves. Then we talked about it's so important to say it that the greatest sages said it all night. And now we're talking about it's so important that we talk about it all the time. That even more so Pesach, you know. So that's what we're talking about, the Exodus of Egypt. You know, everything is Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim. Every Kiddush we make has some mention. Like, for example, I know Rosh Hashanah. Why would Rosh Hashanah Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim? Because on Rosh Hashanah, the Jews actually stopped their servitude in Egypt. They had to sit 6 months without being slaves while the plagues went on, but they still weren't free. And then they finally got freed on Pesach. But everything has to do with Egypt. Now, so the argument is like this. There is apparently, this part I don't know. So you can ask your husbands, sons, fathers, whatever. It says that tzitzis is not a biblical commandment at night for some reason. I don't know that. We're just going to say how this applies to Pesach in a minute. But tzitzis is only rabbinically obligated at night. Now, by the way, for those of you who don't know, tzitzis in general today is only rabbinic altogether. Why? Well, it's not an obligation at all. We made it an obligation. The mitzvah is if you have a square cornered garment, you're obligated to wear tzitzis. Now, all men's garments today are rounded. So we purposely make the square garment and then we put tzitzis on the corner. So then we're obligated, then they, not us, they are obligated in tzitzis. That's the obligation. In the parsha of tzitzis, this is where we talk about Mitzrayim. I am Hashem who took you out of Mitzrayim, mess at the end. But the tzitzis is the paragraph that speaks about Mitzrayim. That's why, so the thing was like this. according to the Aruch HaShulchan, the argument between Ben Zoma and the Chachamim was, we know we have to wear tzitzis at night, albeit rabbinically, and we know we have a tradition that we have to talk about Mitzrayim even at night. We know that. But where is the source from? What's the proof for it? So Ben Zoma says, the proof is that pasuk, you have to remember the days of Mitzrayim. Kol yimei chayecha. So that means you have to talk about Mitzrayim even at night when you're not biblically obligated. That is what Ben Zoma felt, okay? The Chachamim did not disagree with Ben Zoma. They said, no, we're not, we know you still have to say tzitzis at night, say Mitzrayim at night, and you still have to wear tzitzis at night. However, the Kol Yimei Chayecha here is talking about, you're going to even have to talk about Mitzrayim in the days of Mashiach, because that's Kol Yimei Chayecha is Mashiach. So that's their argument. When is Kol Yimei Chayecha? Is it the nights or does it mean Mashiach? Now, why is there an argument like this? There's a pasuk in Yirmiyahu where it says, L'chein, hinei yamim ba'im ne'um Hashem. Here, days are coming, says Hashem. Lo ye'omar od, chai Hashem asher alas b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. People will no longer praise Hashem for taking them out of Mitzrayim. They say that times will come where when Mashiach, the miracles of Mashiach will surpass those of Egypt. And the miracles of Egypt will pale in comparison to the miracles we will experience in the time of Mashiach. It's a shame, we should all merit it. But that's the point, that they say that even in the time of Mashiach, we're still going to have to talk about Mitzrayim, but it's just not going to feel like it feels right now. It's going to be, because it's going to be a lesser degree of joy than we're going to feel the time of Mashiach. Now, I want to clarify something. I clarified this with my son. A lot of people are misunderstanding what's going to happen in the time of Mashiach. The holidays will be in full force. The rabbinics are questionable, but the holidays will all be kept. They're in the Bible. The Bible is forever. It's not like the other religion who says that once somebody comes, we don't have to do them anymore. We're going to have Korban Pesach. We're going to have all the Yom Tovim. And we're also going to have Purim, because Purim teaches us how even in the darkness, you have to push yourself. And Hanukkah, some people say even Hanukkah, but rabbinics, a lot of rabbinics won't be in effect. And the whole Nach, they say, won't be important. Nach, Nevi'im, Ketuvim are all very important for times of Galus. They're messages for us during Galus. After Mashiach comes, we won't need them. So Pesach will just pale in comparison to Mashiach, but we are going to keep the whole Torah after Mashiach comes. I am going to stop here. And I thank you so much, all of you, for listening. And I need this more than you do, but we have to get into Hagada. You'll see there's so much beauty. Next week, we'll do the 4 sons. And I hope to go further. If we can figure out a way to do, we really need 4 classes for Hagada, but this year it didn't just quite work out for me. I was imbibing the Holy Land, and that was my inspiration. But hopefully we can all share together, the rest of the Haggadah next Tuesday at 10 o'clock Canadian time, and what's at 5 o'clock Israeli time. And Emetz Hashem, if Mashiach comes, we hope we'll have the next class in Yerushalayim, Habnuyah, and if not, it's coming very, very soon. So Emetz Hashem, I wish all of you a wonderful, productive week. Pesach cleaning the sweat is like the tears on Yom Kippur. Just remember that, and have a wonderful week. And we all have to thank Elisheva Shields for all of the wonderful things she does to facilitate this class and make it happen. And I thank you all for being there. Now we can open up to comments.